Hi, if everyone would grab a seat, we'll get started. Hey, how are you? Thanks. Thank you. Well, good afternoon and welcome. It's good to see everyone here. I'm Ben Hill. I'm with Georgia Tech's Venture Lab program, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Georgia Tech Clean Energy Speaker Series on building consensus for clean energy and clean technology. We're very delighted that Clean Energy Speaker Series can be part of Georgia Tech's Earth Week, and just bring your attention to the fact that there are all sorts of activities going on campus this week, and on Friday on campus, on the main campus, there'll be a big program and displays and outdoor activities from noon until the afternoon. So just keep that in mind. For those of you who are new to the series, I'd like to give you a little bit of background before we really get into the program. This discussion here has been on clean energy. The role of clean energy and clean technology has been going on since November of 2009. And the notion here is that to examine the role of clean energy and clean technology in meeting the energy needs of the Southeast for the next 20 years through 2030. If you were to go to the website, secleanenergy.gotech.edu, which you see there, you'll find an abundance of great material, resources, which examines not only the role, the viability of the technology, the economic proposition of different technologies and solutions, but also the market applications of different clean energy and clean technology solutions. In addition to the roles of these technologies, there's also great information about the impact of economic development of clean energy and clean tech, creating clean energy, clean tech companies, and the importance of clean energy to national security. So be sure to check out the website. It's a public resource and is available for everyone's use. A number of organizations and individuals have made this series possible, and I would like to thank them and recognize them for their ongoing support. We have an extraordinary group of advisors, Marilyn Brown, Valerie Thomas, uh, David Scholl, and Santiago Gervala, all of whom are on the Georgia Tech faculty, Jay Hakes from the Carter Library, and then Ken Ostrowski from McKinsey & Company are all advisors and have really done a phenomenal job in helping direct and implement the program series. In terms of organizations, I'd like to thank the law firm Sutherland, Asbill & Brennan for their initial support and ongoing financial support of the series, McKinsey & Company for their support, the Turner Foundation for its support, South Base Institute, and then in terms of groups at Georgia Tech, there has been the Strategic Energy Institute here at Georgia Tech, the Enterprise Innovation Institute, the Brooke Byers Center for Sustainable Systems, the Office of Sustainability at Tech, ATDC, Venture Lab, and a number of others. So I'd like to thank all of them for their support. In terms of logistics for today's program, in terms of logistics for today's program, we're going to have some remarks by our distinguished speakers, and then we'll have a question and answer period. Microphones will be passed around during the question and answer period. Because this is being webcast, I would ask that you be sure to speak clearly into the microphone so our webcast participants can hear. And also, because this is being recorded, your questions will be archived for future reference. And for those of you who are participating over the web, you can send your email your questions to me, and I will pass them along to the speakers. And my email address is ben.hill@gatech.edu. That's ben.hill@gatech.edu. If you have comments instead of questions, I would just ask that you be brief with your comments. So, in terms of the next program, the next Georgia Tech Clean Energy Speaker Series program will be on May the 10th, Thursday, May the 10th. And it's a distinct honor for the Clean Energy Series to host the United Kingdom Minister of Energy and Climate Change, Gregory Barker, who will speak on the invisible hand in clean energy as a driver for cooperation. So be sure to mark your calendar for Thursday, May the 10th, and it will be here at this location. Now I'd like to introduce Stephen Fleming, who's Vice President of Georgia Tech's Enterprise Innovation Institute, for some remarks, and who will also introduce our speakers. Stephen?
Thanks for being here, and for those on the web, if I don't look at you, it doesn't mean I'm not thinking about you. So thanks y'all for tuning in. It's a pleasure for me to welcome all of you here. This is, I think Ben had said, it's the 17th of our Clean Energy Speaker Series. I'm also going to get a chance to introduce our guest speakers today. But Ben had asked me to give you a quick overview of the way Georgia Tech takes the creative energy of the researchers on this campus and turns it into real products with real-world impact. We do a lot of spin-off companies. You've probably heard of some of them. Soneva, of course, if this audience is familiar. CardioMEMS, which is working on implantable heart monitors. Damballa doing security software. There's a lot of things coming out of the labs at Georgia Tech. If you look at the research universities around the country, we're consistently ranked in the top 10, usually top 5, depending on the category, but always top 10. And that is also in terms of funding, which is surprising because we don't have a medical school. And that turns out to really dominate the stats in terms of research spending. So we're actually number 2 behind MIT in terms of universities without med schools. And I can handle being number 2 behind MIT. We get about 400 ideas from our faculty a year. We run them through a long, complicated filter process that I won't go into gory detail about. But usually we have anywhere from 70 to 80 ideas in flight at any one time, which are looking at commercialization. Most of the ideas don't go through the process, but Venture Lab usually does 60 or 70, maybe 80 at a time. And we usually wind up creating 15 to 20 companies a year out of Georgia Tech research, which means they've gotten external financing, external partnerships, and external management, because we don't let our professors be CEOs. They're really bad at it. So we go find people who are good at it. Those companies, we started this process almost 12 years ago now. We've created well over 500 jobs and raised over $500 million in venture investment that's been spent in Georgia, attracted to these companies we've created. So it's a pipeline from the laboratory through commercialization, through market impact, and eventually people with jobs paying taxes, which is what I get paid to make happen. Any questions about that? See me after. We're real proud of it. I'm going to stop advertising now and introduce our speakers. And some of this I'm going to have to read to get the titles right. First, we've got Reed Detchen. Reed is the Executive Director in Energy Future Coalition. Come on up, grab, take your chair. The Energy Future Coalition is a broad-based, nonpartisan alliance that seeks to bridge the differences among business, labor, and environmental groups. Boy, that was and identify energy policy options with broad political support. Energy Future Coalition works closely with the United Nations Foundation. Reed previously served as Director of Special Projects in Washington for the Turner Foundation. He's worked at Podesta Associates and served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Conservation and Renewable Energy at the Department of Energy. He was Principal Speechwriter for Vice President George H.W. Bush, I guess during his vice presidency. And he's a graduate of Yale. Jay Hakes, take your chair. Jay Hakes is Director, a lot of people in Atlanta know Jay, Director of the Carter Presidential Library. Most recently, Jay served as, I got to read this out, Director for Policy and Research, National Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill and offshore drilling 2010-2011. That probably was a lot of fun. Jay serves as Director of the Carter Presidential Library here in Atlanta, position he's held since 2000. From 93 to 2000, Jay was Administrator, Energy Information Administration for the DOE. He's the author of A Declaration of Energy Independence. I like that title, published in 2008. He's testified in front of congressional committees more than 25 times, national print, electronic media, Professor of Political Science from the University of New Orleans, PhD and MA from Duke, and a graduate of Wheaton. These are two really impressive folks we've got here. So I'd like you to welcome them with a round of applause, and I'm going to turn it over to them. Thanks for being here, guys. You're up first. Okay.
Thanks a lot, Steve. I appreciate that. Switch the order a little bit here. I think our task today is to discuss things that are maybe a little bit more on the political side than the technical side. There is, I think, a certain amount of dis-ease amongst many people that we are not doing as much as we could to bring the clean energy future about. This was highlighted at a tremendous conference that you may have missed on Monday that the Sam Nunn School did. And to me, one of the real takeaways from it was we had an entrepreneur who had this great company, Georgia Tech origin, somebody who'd made a lot of money already and was spinning off this clean energy business, or it was an energy efficiency business. And their people, the ideas were all from Atlanta. Their capital probably came from Atlanta. Where were they doing their most business? Germany, Singapore, China. So Atlanta is sort of the king of innovation, or along with maybe MIT kings of innovation, but we're not necessarily at the forefront of adopting policies. And I'm just teeing this up because Reed is the main speaker today. I'm just kind of moderating and teeing this up. The atmosphere I might like to create is the glass is always half full and half empty. And sometimes we are accomplishing more than we might actually realize. And the type of work that Reed is doing is often a stimulus to that happening. I go way back to the oil embargo of 1973-74, which is sort of the beginning of the modern energy age. And there is a view out there that we did not do anything about it. Just if you don't believe that, go to Google when you leave and type in energy independence and Jon Stewart, and you'll get the standard view that we did not do anything about it. But even when Nixon was president, we had the 55-mile-per-hour speed limit. We had the Alaska Oil Pipeline. We had fairly sizable, for the time, increases in research and development budgets. And then when you get to President Ford, you get the Energy Act of '75, which brings in the automobile efficiency standards, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, a number of other smaller things that actually was significant legislation. President Carter passed two major energy packages in '79 and '80. President Reagan did not pass any, and in fact pulled back on some of the earlier legislation. But while he was there, most of the oil today in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was put there by the Reagan administration. Also, the Clean Air Board out in California, which Reagan had created, was the dynamic leader during the '80s in terms of implementing energy policy. And we passed the ozone standards during that period. So, there's a little more cooperation and things going on than it appears. Under President Bush, the father, you start to get the implementation of the appliance efficiency standards, which actually passed in '87. but things like our current modern refrigerators go back to that rulemaking. And then the big surprise is in 2005, which is not that, well, in 2005 you get another energy package, and then you get a bigger energy package in 2007, the Energy Independence and Security Act. And most people sort of say, aha, you know, they gave it a good title, there's nothing in it. Well, it's got a lot in it. It revives the auto efficiency program, under which the Obama administration is currently making rules and has consensus on a proposed rule that raises the efficiency standard to 55.4 miles per gallon in 2025. That's not small potatoes. Now, there's a lot of loopholes in that law, so it's not really 54 miles per gallon, but it's still very significant. Has very bold goals for ethanol, including cellulosic ethanol. It sort of phases out some of the corn ethanol with cellulosic ethanol. And it sort of outlaws the incandescent light bulb as we know it. And just as the industry had all the replacement bulbs on the shelves, that became an issue in the presidential election. And why are you taking away our incandescent light bulb? A very consequential piece of legislation. Now, behind this are often think tanks that are doing some of the intellectual work, which we're going to hear about some important intellectual work today. If you go back to 1974, we had the Project Independence report that was done by the government, headed up by a man named John Sawhill. Sawhill was fired after he did the report. Then the other report that year was David Freeman, the Ford Foundation, did the Time to Choose report. You read either of those reports today and you'd say, they could have written that last year and it sounded pretty good. Freeman had an insurrection of his board of advisors, and most of them wrote very strong dissenting opinions. But if you look at the Carter proposal released in April of 1977, it's basically those two reports. So they had a great impact. So Reed's group issued the report Half Empty, or Changing the Rules, Changing the Future. I've actually read it, I just couldn't remember the title, which was a great report, and I think helped set the stage for some of the positive things that have happened in recent years. And all of these things had to be done on a bipartisan basis. The bill in '07 had bipartisan support, even on things that didn't, in some sense, get into the bill. The one thing that got left out of that bill that was most significant was the renewable portfolio standard, which would have been a national standard of 15%. Again, that had a lot of loopholes in it too, but anything Congress does ends up having a lot of loopholes. But that actually had passed the House. It had almost 60 votes in the Senate, but they couldn't quite break the filibuster. So that sort of fell out. So everything wasn't peaches and cream. But I want to do something that I have never done before. I'm actually going to read a paragraph out of my own book. This is about 2007, and it's, as I say, it's not that long ago. Attitudes were changing up Pennsylvania Avenue. President Bush, in his January State of the Union address, endorsed very robust new requirements for displacing oil products with ethanol and modest but still mandatory increases in auto efficiency. The messy back and forth between the House and Senate over the legislation, veto threats from the White House on provisions it did not like, and the failure of several key provisions to survive obscured what was really going on. December saw the passage of the act, an energy package with real teeth. The margins of victory were huge. The Senate passed the bill 86-8, with few in either party in opposition. Republicans split narrowly against the bill by a single vote in the House, where it still won 314-10. The votes reflected the quickest shift in congressional opinion in energy history. I don't know, it'd be interesting if Reed wants to comment on this today. When they did their report in 2005, did they have the feeling that a few years down the road, we would be looking at automobile efficiency standards that were 54 miles per gallon in federal rule? I think it caught a lot of people by surprise. So that's why I'm saying right now, if you are alert to the opportunities at the local level, the state level, the national level, things can sometimes come together and coalesce And all they have to do is lose their partisan edge for about 2 months, and you can get significant legislation, and then they can go back fighting while we implement the laws. So I think that historical perspective of the glass is always kind of half full and always half empty, and things go in cycle. And it's always good to keep the conversation going, because if you come up with a good idea and you've got a good rationale for it, you might be surprised because someday it might actually become law. Our speaker, main speaker, has already been introduced, but I'd like to congratulate him for his role in government and in think tanks for really moving this kind of thinking forward, and congratulate them for the successes they've already had, and wish him good luck for the successes they will have in the future.
All right, well, that was very kind of Jay. I admire of his work in Washington as well, and thank you all for being here. Thanks to Georgia Tech for hosting us, home of Marilyn Brown and a lot of other distinguished people. Thanks to Ben and Stephen for their introductions. I'm going to take a circuitous path forward here. I'm going to start off with a few observations on what Jay just said, and then I'm going to kind of march through the report that Jay was mentioning, because it has some particulars that might give some substance to what we're talking about, and then hopefully we can have a conversation. But first, I ought to briefly introduce the Energy Future Coalition and recognize the Turner Foundation for its essential support. It's really been a creature of the UN Foundation and the Turner Foundation, both of them Ted Turner's charities. And we've had support from a number of other philanthropic sources, but the Turner Foundation has been at the heart of it. And Mike Finley and Ted, of course, have been the leading lights in keeping focused on this energy challenge. And Jay mentioned a little bit about what the role of the Energy Future Coalition and similar groups is in Washington. We all have our different perspectives. Some are more lobbying and advocacy group. Our view is that we actually got started just after 9/11, and the view was that energy was a big part of what happened to us on 9/11. And the conversation in Washington was stuck on a very partisan basis, as Jay mentioned, and it felt to us that the key issues that had to be addressed were not really partisan issues. Sometimes they're regional issues, as energy issues often are, but that we could bring together Republicans and Democrats in a steering committee, which we've done, I think, quite successfully. The initial leadership was Tim Wirth, former senator from Colorado, Democrat, John Podesta, who had just left the Clinton White House as chief of staff, and Boyden Gray, who was the counsel to the George H.W. Bush White House. Strange bedfellows. How can we bring together people who don't agree on much, but agree on some things we can do in the energy area? And can we use that same model to bring together business, labor, and the environmental community and identify things that Congress can pick up and run with? And obviously, you won't be surprised to know that some areas work better than others. And Jay was generous that some of the initial recommendations and arguments that we made in our initial years ended up getting picked up in some of the legislation that came forward, particularly, for example, identifying the smart grid as being an important opportunity for the country, but also the biofuels area and the relationship between that and energy security. I think we were among the first to make some of those arguments. And so really what our role is to change the conversation in Washington. You think about the problem and the challenge that members of Congress have. It's that they are engaged 24/7 in their work, whether that's the actual business of Congress or fundraising or reaching out to constituents or whatever. And they are so busy that they don't have any time to think. And so being able to give a bit of perspective and some fresh thinking to that context can be important and influential, even if it does not have a direct payoff right away. And I would say that generally this is, particularly in the energy area, this is a lengthy and incremental process. Dealing in Washington at all, as Jay would attest, you don't expect results like that. That's why corporate executives who go to be cabinet members throw up their hands in frustration in about 3 months and go back to where people listen to them and do what they say. That's not how it works in Washington. It's a consensus building process that extends not just within Washington but back here, so that uh, uh, people at home are giving the politicians permission to act. You can't, leadership only goes so far if you don't have followership. And so if people are not familiar with what you're proposing, they're going to react against that. And so when people give politicians a hard time for following as opposed to leading, it is a dance. It's an important dance that has to go on. And I'll come back to some of the uh, specifics, but the energy system is a big, complex system, and it's very hard to change. There are a lot of incumbent interests that have to be considered, and so whether you're trying to change how we use fuel in our transportation system or how we fuel our power plants, it's a very big, complicated thing. But the little changes that can occur in legislation or in EPA regulation have an effect over time. And the refrigerator example that Jay gave is an example of how energy efficiency is the gift that keeps on giving. You get this initial little bit of legislation directing the Department of Energy to set standards. And basically the standards are meant to be the most stringent standards that also meet a cost effectiveness test from a consumer point of view. Can you set a standard that will give the consumer less energy consumption, but not in a way that would be more expensive than their current situation? And that can be pretty aggressive. In fact, the department has had a hard time really living up to that standard because that's a little bit further typically than the manufacturers want to go and so forth. But you get that in place and you get that iterated over time, and now you have refrigerators that are bigger and hold more and use less energy and are cheaper than they were before you started the process. So there are definitely win-win things, but it takes that's a 20-year story. And so as you think about the energy system, it's not something that we can get instant results on. And I'll also say just a bit about the topic of the series, which is, in a sense, we're talking about this generally, but the role of clean energy and clean technology, because the comment was made that a lot of investments here in the Atlanta area are flowing out to other countries. It goes to the fact that policy really does matter. Energy is a marketplace activity, but it's a policy-driven and policy-constrained market. Policies set the boundaries of what people can and will do. And so the theme of the Energy Future Coalition that you'll hear me run through in some particular areas is change the rules, hurry the future. If you get the rules right, the rest will follow. If you're trying to fight against the way the policy and the rules are structured and putting people against their own economic self-interest, it makes it very, very difficult to change. And so what's happened, just to take that example right now, is that people do recognize the global opportunity for energy investments, clean energy investments, and U.S. money is flowing into those investments in other countries where there is good policy driving those investments. And ironically, money is flowing into this country not because the policy is right yet, but because they're long-term investors and they understand that this is an inevitable transition that's going to occur. And so we have external investors coming in and investing in the U.S. and U.S. investors going outside. I would venture to say that if we could get our policy right, we could get a little bit more harmonized on that. And finally, I'll add one more commercial before we get to the meat of this, which is that the year 2030 as a destination date came up, and that's an interesting date to me because my other hat, besides running the Energy Future Coalition, is running the Climate and Energy Program for the United Nations Foundation. We work very closely with the UN Secretary General, who has launched an initiative called Sustainable Energy for All. And this Sustainable Energy for All initiative has 3 objectives for 2030 for the world. Number 1, can we get universal access to modern energy services by 2030? Now, what does that mean? 1.5 billion people have no access to electricity. About 1 out of every 5 people in the world, no access to electricity. Another billion get it intermittently. So the power's on, the power's off. 2.5 billion people, 2 out of every 5 people in the world, still use firewood, charcoal, even animal waste for heating and cooking. And the health effects, in addition to the labor and everything else that goes along with that, are really horrendous. You can't expect people to participate in the modern economy if they're using such primitive energy sources. You can't have development without energy, and you can't have sustainable development without sustainable energy. So, number 1 objective for the Secretary General, universal access to modern energy services by 2030. Now, as we think about that, we have to think about a sustainable planet, sustainable energy for all. So the other 2 objectives are double the rate of improvement in energy efficiency between now and 2030, and double the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix by 2030. That would be, if we can do those 2 together, then we can accelerate this clean energy transition globally and also make sure that everybody who doesn't have access to modern energy ends up with really the ability, the enabling tools that they need to succeed and to prosper. This will be brought forward at the Rio Plus 20 conference. I don't expect you know what that is, but in June of this year, the 20th anniversary of the Rio Earth Summit. Countries of the world will gather in Rio again for the UN Conference on Sustainable Development. They will have a dialogue, and we hope that there will be a strong endorsement of the Secretary General's initiative there. So just a sidelight, I've been working a lot on that. If any of you are interested in the global implications or the global picture here, happy to talk about that. So, challenges and opportunities. Again, rules are at the heart of this, and my crack AV team managed to make these little signs almost unreadable. So I'll read some of these quotes for those of you who can't do it. This is out of an article that Tim Worth wrote with John Podesta and Vinod Khosla, who's the Silicon Valley venture capitalist. Good rules align the interests of individuals and corporations with the public interest, so that business can profit in ways that also make society richer and safer. And as we get on to the idea of utilities, I'll give some specific examples on that. But let's identify what we want to accomplish, and then let's set the rules so that private enterprise is motivated and rewarded for pursuing those goals. So let's start with transportation. I'm going to do this in a sort of a vision and then specifics. I think that as you look to transportation, a long-term picture here is away from oil and toward electricity. The main reason is that electric motors are so much more efficient than internal combustion engines. Now, there are great improvements that have and will be made in internal combustion engines. This is not a slam dunk, but if you have an electric vehicle or a hybrid that's getting power off the grid, your fuel cost, not the cost of buying the car, but the fuel cost from electricity almost inevitably will beat gasoline by a considerable margin. So as we sort of rationalize where we're going in the future, as we want to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and on imported oil, and as we want to clean up the system and encourage efficiency, electricity will start to permeate transportation more and more. So, for example, if we move to plug-in hybrids, so people have the flexibility, you could reduce gasoline use very substantially by about half by 2050. Now, an interesting thing about hybrids is that they're essentially a container for a big battery. And that battery is very useful when you want transportation, but most people are in their cars only a little bit every day. Some people very little, maybe here in Atlanta with the commuting times longer than you would want to be. But in any case, most, as I'm sure you've seen this, most trips on a daily basis, people drive less than 40 miles a day. And so for a Chevy Volt, for example, you should be able to do most of your daily business just on electricity. But of course, you want the flexibility to go further, so you want the other fuel. But so you have this big battery out there, and it's sitting in the parking lot all day, or it's sitting at home. And what is a battery? A battery is something that holds power. It stores power. And there are a lot of other things that need that power. So for example, the electric utility system, every second is trying to manage supply and demand. Electricity has to be constantly in perfect tension between supply and demand. And so they are running so-called spinning reserves. They're running power plants simply to be available to fill in those fluctuations. What if you could get those fluctuations filled instead by tapping into the vehicles in the parking lot and pay the people who own those cars for those services you're providing to the utility system? That's an enormous storage device. In fact, if you had a whole fleet of hybrids, you would have the capacity of thousands of megawatts of reserve power. So as we think about how do we balance fluctuating wind or solar or other kinds of sources, the ability to tap into this enormous distributed storage system, whether it's in people's cars, it could be in school buses that are parked all day. If you could tap into those batteries, you could have an enormous distributed storage system. Liquid fuels. For range, for a lot of reasons, liquid fuels make a lot of sense. It gives people a lot more flexibility. Maybe we'll figure out better answers further down the line. But even today, we have gotten tremendous benefits from the off-maligned ethanol program, which again started under Ronald Reagan. I mean, this is something that goes back 30 years now. And this takes a long time to figure out. When I was in the Bush Energy Department in the senior Bush, 88 to 93, we really focused on this biofuels question and how do we get the next generation beyond corn. And here we are 20 years later, and I think we're getting there in the near term, but it's taken quite a long time. But not only have we reduced our imported oil needs, as Jay mentioned, but the addition of that extra fuel into the system has, by reducing our global demand, Merrill Lynch and others calculate, that's cut the cost of a gallon of gasoline by about 50 cents a gallon. So as much as we're unhappy about $4 a gallon, it'd be $4.50 if we didn't have ethanol in the system. And fundamentally, what's the basis of the whole OPEC monopoly? It's that it is a monopoly. We don't have any choice about how we run our cars and trucks. They have to run on oil. Until we get alternatives, whether they're ethanol or methanol or natural gas or electricity, oil will always have that stranglehold, and indeed the people in Saudi Arabia will be able to set the world price. Just a note at the bottom, and you'll hear me come back to this several times. We have a whole new world that's emerged from the availability of cheap natural gas. Natural gas right now is less than $2 an MCF, which is not economic for the producers, but it's a phenomenal bargain for consumers. And on a comparative basis, that's an amount of energy for $2 that you'd need to spend $15 to get from oil. So to get the same amount of energy, $2 from gas, $15 from oil, a huge disparity. That's going to drive huge pressures to convert every conceivable oil use to gas, and a gas infrastructure to have a compressed natural gas would be expensive and difficult, but converting it to a liquid fuel like methanol might be somewhat easier and something we could do rather quickly. Flexible fuel vehicles that use ethanol can use methanol and essentially can be produced at the same cost of current vehicles. So how do you change the rules in this area? Well, Jay mentioned the remarkable changes in fuel economy standards that are coming down the line. We can get ready for more electric vehicle integration. So my example about using batteries in the parking lot, well, you need to have those hooked up to the system in some way so they could tap that energy. Could we get the fuel infrastructure more available for these alternative fuels? It's all well and good to have a car that runs on ethanol or methanol, but you got to find some place to refuel it. And of course, the opportunity of these advanced biofuels mimicking what nature does and actually being much more effective and efficient in how we produce liquid fuels from biomass and other sources, that offers the opportunity for really substantial breakthroughs. Okay, electricity. Well, how do we want to hurry the future in the electricity sector? Well, what would it mean to have a smart grid? One thing it would mean would be that the power outages that can take down the whole Northeast in one act could be contained. If you move, essentially, the more you move, and as the more the system is moving now away from sort of human control to direct intervention by IT systems, the more you can start to manage the flow of electricity and control problems. This is, as Jim Woolsey, the former CIA director, is fond of telling us, this is not just a problem when a tree branch falls in Cleveland. If you took I say a high-powered rifle, I guess maybe it doesn't even need to be a high-powered rifle, and went around to the transformers around the city of Atlanta, you could take out the power to the Southeast for months. This is a huge security threat. There's very poor protection for it. These transformers are big, expensive, one-of-a-kind things, and there are not replacements easily available. And where there are replacements, some utilities have had the unique vision to stick them right next to the ones that they would replace. So now you need 2 bullets instead of 1 bullet. But in any case, if somebody who had bad intentions wanted to take out our power system, there's a very soft underbelly here. We need to have the ability to control the outages that would ripple from that, and as much as we can, in effect, give self-contained generation pools that can survive broader disruptions to the grid. Number 2, consumer power. This comes across in a number of ways, but for example, right now you get a bill at the end of the month for your electricity use, and you pay it. But you don't buy groceries that way. You don't go into the grocery store and take whatever you want and see what it costs you at the end of the month. You make decisions based on what you can afford at a given point in time. Giving consumers more ability to control when they're using high-cost power and when they're using low-cost power can be good for the system, and it could be good for consumers. I think I come back to this later, but it's equally true with renewable energy. If you make the investment to stick a solar panel on your roof, you should be able to use that when you need it, and when you don't need it, sell it back into the system so that they would be able to use it for the rest of their needs. That is something that's a change for the utilities' business patterns, and that's what I'll talk about in the next slide. But it's something that needs to happen. And finally, there's a counterintuitive piece here to efficiency. If we get the utilities to invest in efficiency, what often happens is that consumers, big corporate consumers in particular, complain that their rates are going to go up so that we can do this goo-goo efficiency idea. That completely misses the boat. The reason you do efficiency is because you're freeing up supply, so that if you only need 100 megawatts instead of 120 megawatts, you're not buying that extra 20 megawatts of supply. And that can be used elsewhere, or it can avoid the need for a new power plant to produce that 20 megawatts of supply. So that the benefit is that instead of investing in that new nuclear plant or that new gas plant, if you can get that same amount of supply that would be produced by that plant out of the system by getting people to use their electricity more efficiently, then everybody's going to benefit. So typically the order of magnitude is to get a kilowatt hour of electricity from investing in efficiency costs 3 cents, and you'd be hard pressed to build anything anywhere to give you electricity for less than 6 cents. So roughly, and a nuclear plant probably 9 or 12. So at least half the cost of new generation to get that same supply from efficiency. It's a better investment. We don't ask people to all chip in for the new power plant as a voluntary measure and go door to door and say, would you give $1,000 so we can build a new power plant? No, we systematize. And similarly, if we're going to get that power out of the system from efficiency, we shouldn't be going door to door to people and say, would you put $1,000 into new windows and a new furnace in your basement? No, we should be investing in that the same way we're investing in a new power plant, because we're delivering supply to the system at a cheaper cost than you can do by building new generation. So what kind of rules are we talking about here? Well, these smart IT, the computer systems and the sensing and monitoring systems are giving us so many more tools for managing power in ways we never dreamt of. So a big commercial building in downtown Atlanta can wire up its energy use and control the way its heating and air conditioning system work, and save money dramatically just from better controls. You start to spread that more broadly, and you can do this systematically. The utility can start to control those buildings. They can start to use the power that they're getting from those cars in the parking lot. You start to see how the computer revolution, ironically, is getting to the utility industry the latest of any industry in America, even though electricity is the underpinning of the computer industry. So once these two things get put together, you're going to see transformational change and opportunity. We mentioned giving consumers the power to have variable rates, so that if they want to run their appliances when it's off-peak power and only pay 3 cents instead of 9 cents, they would have that opportunity. And we, I think, have societal interests in moving in a coherent way toward a future that relies on efficiency, on gas, and on renewable energy, as opposed to the conventional alternatives. And the most efficient way to do that will be to go through in effect, an agreement, here a clean energy standard or a renewable portfolio standard, about where we want the system to go forward, and the utilities will respond to that. It's not true in this region, but 28 or 29 states have renewable energy standards, set minimum levels of renewable energy for production in their state. These are very popular things. And to my knowledge, no renewable energy standard has ever been repealed or reduced. And in fact, Texas, of all places, where this was among the pioneers under Governor George W. Bush, they have doubled their renewable energy standard. They've created an enormous wind industry in West Texas that's transformed the way they use and produce energy. California has recently increased its renewable energy standard to 33% by 2020 or 2025. So one can be very aggressive. Back to efficiency with a little bit more of a utility lens. As I mentioned in the context of the Secretary General's initiative, doubling the rate of improvement is certainly within our grasp. Uh, Buildings are a particularly ripe target. And in Atlanta, here with some really outstanding local leadership, the city is stepping up to the administration's Better Buildings Challenge and really accomplishing remarkable things. Mayor Reed has really taken hold of this. There's been a lot of support from suspects that you might not be surprised at, the Turner Foundation and the Kendeda Foundation. Rutherford Seidel in the back of the room has been really driving this process and organizing business leaders to come forward. A.J. Robinson of Central Atlanta Progress has really been driving this forward, working with Southface. And the result is that they have assembled already 21 million square feet of downtown real estate to be retrofitted for efficiency purposes. In their own self-interest, I might add. This is not some special giveaway. It's doing the same things I was talking about. Let's monitor our energy use. Let's get efficient buildings. Let's have efficient HVAC systems. Let's get our water use under control in what may be another drought year. And so what's 21 million square feet? I don't know. I got a sophisticated audience here, but this is a number that's hard for me to know. This building might be 200,000 square feet. This building is 500,000, so it's a big building. So you'd have 42 of these buildings are committed, and another 10 million square feet, so another 20 of these buildings are coming into this picture. So the Midtown area is getting engaged as well. This is, there are a lot of tools that are available to do this. This is, when people, the classic story you hear about efficiency is, this is like a $20 bill in the middle of the street. If this was, economists will say, if this all makes so much sense, why don't people pick up that $20 bill? Well, it turns out that the $20 bill is under a glass cover and got a little glue sticking to the floor. It's not that easy to pick it up. And people spend a lot of time and energy trying to get that $20 bill off the ground. And if they don't do it smart, they may spend $20 to do it. And so that's why it doesn't happen as much as it should. But the idea here in Atlanta is let's get a cluster of buildings, and 21 million square feet is a lot more than a cluster. Let's create a mass market for efficiency. Get the providers, the TOTO toilets and the HVAC vendors to come in and want to participate together, drive down costs, aggregate the market in a way that increases efficiency, and use different financing tools. There are different ways to finance this. One of the most promising, I'm sure many of you have heard about, is PACE, which stands for Property Assessed or Property Assured Clean Energy. The idea is that a municipality or another governing entity could issue bonds, and that money would be available to residential or business consumers for energy efficiency retrofits, and they would pay that bill back on their property tax bill. And so it'd be a completely assured repayment stream, really take the risk out of the equation financially, drive down the cost of money. When you drive down the cost of money, you can do more ambitious projects and get the paybacks to work. These are the kinds of things that are being discussed here in Atlanta. Atlanta can be really a national leader on this. I think that the story in the AJC today was that Atlanta is number 3 right now in the country in energy efficient buildings. But if this takes hold of the way that it really has a lot of promise to do, it could be number 1 and could really be a signature achievement for Atlanta. So why is this so hard? Well, some of the reasons I've mentioned, but another reason is that in most parts of the country still, utilities are compensated by selling power. Well, that sounds like a big duh, but think about what that means. The more power you sell, the more money you make. So let's do a big efficiency program and reduce the amount of power you're going to sell. That's not a very attractive proposition to the businessmen who are running those utilities. You mean you want me to sell less of what I want to sell and make less money? And why do I want to do that? So this is a critical challenge, I think, that's really coming to a head for a number of different reasons that go beyond efficiency. We have to rethink the utility business model. If you think about how we got to where we started this, utilities have a monopoly in an area. And so 100 years ago, states created public utility commissions. And the idea was somebody needs to exercise control over that monopoly power and stand in there for the consumer. And they came up with a very good system that built a lot of power plants, a very successful, wonderful system that basically utilities invested, and they recouped that investment by little bitty extra charges on the utility bills over 20 years. And because the commissions want to give them an incentive to do that, they gave them a reasonable rate of return, and it's a nice, very assured system, very safe. Widows and orphans can invest in utility stocks, et cetera, et cetera. Why is that model now under stress? What's happening? Well, we're kind of in the utility system where we were with the computer system 20 years ago, or I guess it's 30 probably. But you think about the big mainframe IBM computer, and everybody had a wire into that computer, and they had dumb desktops. And they said you got to get bigger and bigger mainframes, and eventually they said, well, what about doing this differently? Couldn't we have powerful little computers that are all linked together and work together? And lo and behold, that was cheaper, faster, better, and the mainframe is something for museums now. So the same thing is starting to happen in the power sector. I'm not saying that central station generation is going to go away altogether, but if we can have a more distributed system so that you have neighborhoods perhaps that are self-sufficient because they have mini grids and they have some self-generation, or at least you have homes and businesses that are generating energy and using less energy, this starts to make a whole lot of sense from the point of view of the system. But from the point of view of the utility, what you're saying is, let's take all your best paying customers off the system. Let's have your other customers use you only when they really need you. And you maintain this big, enormous system so that on the hottest day in July, everybody can come to you running and you have to supply them power. And they say, well, how do I pay for that? We have to think about different ways to do this, because if everybody's off the system, except for 3 little old ladies in Decatur, they're going to have a heck of a time paying back that power plant. So we have to think about different ways to reward the utility. And what I'm saying is that the way we have the rules set up now, the utilities are operating in their own clear, enlightened self-interest. This is how we make money. We've got a good system. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, blah, blah, blah. But the system is changing around them in such a way that we need the rules to change. And the trick will be, I believe, finding ways to reward utilities that are just as attractive to them economically, financially, as the system that they have today, but that drive a different set of outcomes that are more aligned to what consumers want. What do consumers want? They want cheap, reliable power. They want somebody to pick up the phone when the power goes out. They want clean, many of them want at least access to clean, sustainable energy. Can we start to build a system that rewards utilities for delivering those kinds of services and ends up that they are just as profitable as they are today, but they're doing it in a way that meets society's needs and meets consumers' needs? That, I think, is the big challenge that we're facing in the utility area. And the first step is we have to decouple their revenues from their sales. Develop new business models. I mentioned the new financing mechanisms for efficiency. We have to treat efficiency as a supply resource. So we go after that 3-cent power instead of the 6 or 9 cent power. And again, A lot of this can be driven, some of it can be just incentives and negotiating with utilities. Sometimes you need a 2x4 to help you along, and so you could set standards that they have to meet because that's what consumers want. Let's see. Okay, I'm sure I've gone longer than you wanted me to, but I'm coming to the end. As we look forward on clean and renewable energy, um, you hear these kinds of phrases all the time, but you hear the upper Midwest is the Saudi Arabia of wind, or you think about the solar resources in the desert Southwest, et cetera, et cetera. There is a lot of energy waiting out there to be supplied to the rest of the country at low cost. The problem is that it is all in the desert Southwest or North Dakota or Nebraska or Kansas. And that's not where the people are, which is not too surprising because who wants to live where the wind blows all the time or it's so hot you can't go out in the daytime? You know, I mean, that's why they're there. Number one priority is to get the transmission system hooked up to these resources so we can get access to that very abundant, permanently available, low cost, never increase in price, renewable energy as a main resource within our electric utility system. Gas. The world has fundamentally changed in this country on energy because of the availability of gas. That's just a transformation over the last 5 years. And now it looks like for as far as we can see, at least for planning purposes, at least a generation, we're going to have very abundant low-cost natural gas. We have to start thinking through the implications of that and thinking through what we want the system to look like. But at the very least, we can say that the rules of the game, again, EPA rules about pollution and so forth, are going to drive people away from coal and toward gas and very cheap gas. So to do that, to restate a little bit, we need to expand and connect the transmission grid. We need to allow better rules for connecting solar or wind or any kind of distributed energy. It could be a combined heat and power facility in a factory to the grid without punitive barriers that are erected by utilities who are trying to protect their market or try to protect their business model. We should strengthen the renewable energy standards and incentives. We want to encourage the development of this gas in a way that is not environmentally harmful, and this is a very doable proposition. It's been made into what seems like a much more difficult proposition than it should because the industry has not been particularly responsive and helpful. But this is certainly something that can be done if we can either persuade the industry to cooperate or, if need be, regulate or legislate to make that happen. We want to be clear to utilities for their planning purposes on where the country is going on air quality so that they can plan for these new assets. And we should continue to research ways to use coal in a way that's sustainable over time. So the bottom line is that in a policy-driven market, we can identify where we want to go to. You know, the old expression about hockey, that Wayne Gretzky wasn't good because he went to where the puck was. He was good because he went to where the puck was going to be. And if we can think about where the puck is going to be, and I think that some of the pieces that I've thrown out here today, available natural gas, electricity and transportation, distributed generation and a smart grid, if we can see how that's coming together with IT technology and transforming our energy supply and use picture in a way that everybody's going to be happy about. Everybody's going to like this world a lot better because we're going to have clean energy. It's going to be more efficiently used, cheaper delivered, and more flexibly available. If we can see that future, to get there, to hurry that future, we need to change the rules and make it happen. So thank you very much. And as I understand it, Jay gets the first crack at asking me tough questions, and then we'll ask you all to. So start thinking about your questions.
Well, I'll just ask. I'll ask one then. I was attracted by this idea of changing the incentives for utilities, and a number of states have already done that. I think your report mentions Maryland has done that. Was that done in Maryland and other states? Was that done because the utility agreed to that happening and saw that in its own self-interest, or did it have to sort of be imposed?
Well, as you can imagine, every state is different, and it has to do with the history of regulation in each state. Generally, roughly, what was it, the beginning of the George W. Bush administration, there was a big push to decouple and free up utilities from the conventional regulatory structure nationally, create power pools, and we got kind of halfway down that road, and Enron happened, and people said, whoa, let's think about that for a decade or two. So nothing's much happened since then, and we're kind of half and half now, or a third and two-thirds. So in areas like the South, which really didn't move in that direction, there would be a long leap to get to this kind of a system, though Duke Energy in particular under Jim Rogers has been quite aggressive in rethinking the regulatory model. In other states where there was more deregulation, Maryland, for example, the utilities in Maryland had divested themselves of all their generation. So they didn't care as much about the previous, about assuring that they could use their power plants and generate their power. And so there was more openness to a change in the model. And if you want to do efficiency, this is just sort of the big duh. You can't have the utility incentivized to sell more power and expect them to sell less. So the governor showed leadership on that, set a very aggressive energy efficiency target, and changed the rules through the legislation and the State Public Utility Commission.
Looks like Professor Barron has to leave, but may have a question.
Oh, thank you so much, Jay and Reed. Those are wonderful remarks. You mentioned, Jay, the forum, the San Juan Energy Policy Forum that took place on Monday, where the morning was devoted mostly...
It was your panel that I referred to.
mostly to to shale gas and the impact that it's having in the energy industry these days. And Reed, you mentioned also that it's come onto the scene fast and furious, and I think it's taking a lot of the wind out of the sails of many of the renewable energy and energy efficiency initiatives. And I guess my question is, what do you think we can do to sustain the momentum that we're beginning to see across the country in these clean energy technologies during a period where we also are potentially seeing a tremendous surge, but potentially short-term in very low-cost and relatively clean fossil fuel?
Well, not surprisingly, that's a great question, and I'm going to answer it directly and then take it one step further for everybody to think about your homework assignment. I think that to date, renewable energy deployment in this country has largely been driven by public policy because that's what people want. You look at poll after poll after poll, renewable energy is the 70 to 80% preferred alternative of the public. And so understanding that that's the direction we want to move in, I think renewable energy has come down in price. It's less and less marginally expensive to the alternatives. Gas is changing that equation, but I think you go back to the original presumption that we need public policy to drive us in that direction. And to me, the obvious outcome is that if you can develop a system that combines natural gas with renewables, renewables are not available some parts of the day and night, and the clouds go in front of the sun or the wind stops blowing. You need backup power. So if you had a hybrid system of gas and renewables, it may not be the number one optimal, cheapest alternative, but in terms of long-term sustainability, clean performance, et cetera, I think that we need to move in that direction. Now I'm gonna pose the stumper for you. We're all sort of astonished at how much gas is out there, and I think that if anything, we've probably underestimated it. So we're going to have a lot of gas, and this is going to be a global phenomenon. But what they're also finding is that the same fracking techniques that have unlocked all this gas can be applied to oil. And you can go into just about every oil field that ever existed and start to frack the source rock and get tremendous additional supply of oil. So now, you know, sort of our whole construct, Jay, has been built around, well, we're moving toward peak oil, fossil fuels are getting more expensive, that helps you move toward alternatives, cheaper, cleaner alternatives, which we want. If we have to deal with the possibility that there may be initially a great surge in supply of oil production in this country at not terribly cheap cost, but let's say $50 versus the $100 that we're paying on the open market. And if then the Saudis start fracking their source rock, the whole global fossil fuel supply picture changes in a fundamental way. There are huge geopolitical implications, of course. China, Russia, Europe, that just flow from this. But if we're trying to move toward a world where we've brought greenhouse gas emissions under control by mid-century, it appears increasingly we're not going to have an assist from the market, and we're going to have to do that more consciously and take it on directly as an objective, as opposed to, oh, it's all going to be easy because we're going to make these changes anyway. Jay, did you want to?
Well, that's a great answer. I would point out the Journal of American History is devoting its entire June issue to the history of oil. And in that issue will be an article about the historical origins of fracking and where it came from. And it will show that there were actually policy initiatives that led to it. It wasn't just the private sector going out and inventing this. There were many incentives, some of which were put in place in the 1970s. And this is based on George Mitchell, the oil man who developed all of this. I think to summarize what Reed said is I've given many speeches, and I have many scars to prove it, arguing over the last 15 years that peak oil was an exaggerated theory, that I wished it was true because it would make climate change easier. And just to summarize what Reed said, I think the fact that we don't have peak oil means we're going to have to be wiser. So this is a challenge for us and the whole world.
Who knows the fastest growing, economically healthiest state in the United States? North Dakota. Oil is just gushing out of North Dakota. And that's where you want to go if you want to get a job. It's amazing. And taking a field that was producing, I don't know, Jay, you'd be better with the numbers than I am, but something like, I don't know, what do you know the numbers?
Well, Bakken in
exactly.
North Dakota is probably approaching 1 million barrels a day, but there's a whole formation below Bakken that they can just move to once they've done that. So, and these are the shale oil resources have been known since the first term of Richard Nixon. I mean, they're talking about it all the time. They just didn't have any way to economically extract it. And actually, in the Nixon administration, they were conducting experiments in Colorado to have nuclear explosions to free up the oil and gas. They were actually doing the nuclear explosions. That fell out of favor. And George Mitchell developed the technology of high-pressure water, unfortunately probably mixed with a few other chemicals. But, and that's proven to be wildly economical. And everybody that's buying gas now is very programmed that it can go up even double, and it's still a bargain for them, as Reed suggested. So the ramifications are just huge.
And one of the reasons that gas is $2 is that everywhere you find oil, you find gas. So they're going gangbusters on this and producing a lot of secondary gas. They don't have any use for it, so they'll sell it on the market for any price. And even though it costs $4 or $6 to produce gas from shale in the east, there's extra gas is coming on the market at virtually nothing, and the forward price is $2, and that's tough on the gas industry.
Can we just stay on this topic for a second? My name is Mike Boyle, and I know the president signed an executive order earlier this week initiating an interagency working group to coordinate regulation of these non-conventional, sources. And I read it over. It's very short and nondescript. I didn't know how to read into it. I didn't know if you gave any context, for it, and also provide an opinion on whether it could actually firm up prices for natural gas.
Well, I'll say two things about that. One is that I think that the oil and gas industry has a long history of resisting regulation. And the idea that they now need additional rules or oversight when they feel they've been doing fracking for a long time, it's all safe, blah, blah, blah. They are resisting that quite substantially. But I think that the public outcry on some of the incidents on the gas development in areas where they're not accustomed to working. They're not in Wyoming, they're not in Texas. Now they're in Pennsylvania, where people get mad about their landscape getting disrupted or their being able to light their faucet. They don't like that. If the industry does not respond to that, they are going to run into an increasing level of public resistance that's going to jeopardize their ability to develop these resources. So I think it's in the industry's interest to collaborate with some sort of a broader program of examining how the practices of drilling for these are watched over and enforced and so on and so forth. This can all be done, I think, in a quite a benign way from the industry's point of view, but it's been a very difficult political challenge. I expect that that's what the administration's task force will principally be focusing on, that kind of regulation. But I would say a different thing, which is I would hope either as an offshoot of this this task force or as another task force the president might designate. I think we need to go back to first principles. Jay talked about some of the early energy studies from the Carter days, the Ford Foundation, et cetera, and for better or for worse, Dick Cheney's infamous energy task force at the beginning of the George W. Bush administration. They defined a roadmap. Now, you can agree or disagree, a good roadmap, bad roadmap, but for these busy politicians who don't have time to think about this, it gives you a list of 20 things you could do. And, okay, well, I could do this or I could do that. It gives them a menu that they can work from. I think that we need to create, at some high level, in the administration, a blue ribbon commission, doesn't matter much to me, but somebody who's going to define the new roadmap, think through what the implications of cheap gas, cheap oil, abundant domestic supplies are. We're exporting more finished petroleum products than we are importing now, so we're already exporting in some ways. People are talking about exporting gas. Let me ask you all a question. People legitimately disagree about this question. So we have all this gas. Oh, well, let's sell it. Okay. So let's be like, now I'm going to slant the argument. Let's be like Nigeria and take everything we can take out of the ground, sell it to rich countries, and then buy their products. That's a good commodity-based way to have a very poor economy. Or do we say, no, that's our gas, and we have a huge competitive advantage when we can get gas for $2, and in Japan they have to pay $15, and in Europe they have to pay $11. That's how we're going to rebuild our manufacturing base in this country. That's how we keep the chemical industry in this country. That's how we keep the pharmaceutical industry in this country. And we're going to keep that gas for ourselves. But there is going to be a big debate over how much of this gas or even coal we export. Jay, you might have a different view on it.
Yeah. I think Reed is right that there are certainly attendant problems to fracking. Apart from all the water problems, when they're fracking oil up in the Dakotas, they've been flaring methane. Now, I am not an emotional person, but if anything would bring me to tears, it's the flaring of methane. I mean, it's such a waste of a good fuel. It's a potent greenhouse gas. We should never be flaring methane in this country. And ironically...
Maybe you'll just tell them what flaring methane means. It means burning the natural gas you don't want.
Right. Which I guess at that point it would be CO2. but if you're venting it, then it's methane. But you know, it's such a waste, and actually, it turns out, you know, I've spent a lot of my time talking to people at the American Petroleum Institute, and I love those guys, and some days I hate those guys. But I think they often are blinded to the self-interest of their own industry. It's not in their interest to not be regulated, so they build bad wells. And also, if there had been more environmental protection, they wouldn't be oversupplying the market right now, because supply has outgrown demand. So actually, environmental protection would have kept the market in better balance, and they probably would have made more money. Now, on this issue of export, I think that problem's going to go away. The export, when you move gas around the world, you have to liquefy it. That is an energy-intensive process, and you also lose energy efficiency as you deliver it in these very expensive tankers. So that's one point where I disagreed a little bit with what was being said on Monday, because my own view is it will be easier to export the fracking technology than it will be to export the fracked gas. Because to export the fracked gas, you're going to have to liquefy it. It'd be much more economic for someone to buy the license to the technology and frack the gas in their own country, somewhere closer to the market. So I think that problem, to me, is a little bit exaggerated. But because there are negative climate change implications to liquefaction of gas, I would be tempted to depart from my normal more free market attitudes and maybe try to keep the gas here because liquefaction is just not the optimal way to be using gas. It's better than coal, you know, so if it's needed to displace coal, that's fine.
Just to stir the brew a little bit more, people want to export our coal resources to China. Now, if you don't think climate change is a problem, skip the rest of this argument. But here's a good idea for you. Let's take our most carbon-intensive resource and send it to our competitors so that they can have cheaper energy and burn that carbon-intensive resource so that they can heat the planet the same as if we did. Now that, again, somebody needs to explain to me why that's a good idea.
In the defense of China, they are building more efficient coal plants than we are.
And the last point, to go to Jay's flaring point, how many of you have seen the picture, The World at Night? It's a global picture. It's a great picture, right? You see these huge areas with no electricity, and they're dark, and then you can pick out Atlanta. You know, you can pick out wherever you want. What are the biggest, brightest spots in the whole world? I didn't realize this until somebody pointed out to me. They're flaring. They are huge plumes of natural gas in Nigeria and Siberia and places like that, where it's oil production. They don't have any gathering infrastructure or ability to use natural gas, so they burn it. And so, bigger than the lights of New York, bigger than the lights of Beijing or London, are these enormous plumes of natural gas being burned 24/7. And there's a wonderful picture that I think was in Life magazine of young boys playing soccer at night in Nigeria by the light of the gas flares in villages that have no electricity.
And if we're driving that Nigerian oil, that flaring should count in our carbon budget.
Now he's getting controversial.
Yes, I'm an economist. I completely agree with the argument of increasing smart grid technology. And I know one of the main ways that we incentivized the beginning was ERA funding. And I know it's not necessarily that popular with consumers, not necessarily businesses, but consumers. So I'd be curious to hear your argument or your suggestions for how we continue to expand now that the ERA money's gone and it's not popular. Unlike renewables, you know, we have limited money. People want renewables, but they don't want smart grid. What do you think are the best steps?
Well, it's a good question. The stimulus money was used to pay for a lot of smart grid technology, and a lot of utilities in their infinite wisdom went out and bought a lot of smart meters and installed them and didn't tell anybody what they were for or why they wanted them. Or better yet, they tried to get it through their regulatory commission, and the commission said, no, what's the benefit to the consumer here? Oh, well, we don't have to read the meter anymore. No, what's the benefit to the consumer? Anyway, it has not been well managed, but as I often say, people don't go into the utility business to become entrepreneurs. it's a mindset. You have to adopt a consumer mindset of how are you enhancing consumer value. I think that once that mindset can take hold, then the various technologies associated with smart grid are very attractive to consumers, but it will require improved marketing skills and enlightened regulatory treatment, I guess.
So basically, rebranding is the main way is to get people believing that it actually helps them.
Well, not just getting them to believe it, but actually helping them. I mean, we all have the classic VCR phenomenon of the blinking lights. And I guess something like Johnson Controls did a study that said, I don't know, some high percentage, let's say 40% of people who have programmable thermostats have never programmed them because they don't know how to do it. Okay, so that's because the products are either being sold by the people who sold you your computer and don't know how to explain how to do that, or the utilities, and maybe they don't even want you to save the energy. So, I mean, there's not a very good conflict of interest here. But there are a lot of third parties who are coming along, entrepreneurs, Silicon Valley types, who say, wow, this is an app. We can do this and that. And once this is more consumer-friendly and, frankly, fun, I'd love to be able, on the, coming home from the metro, to say, turn on my computer and raise the thermostat or lower the thermostat, and then 15 minutes later when I get home, everything, or unlock the door. And you do that on your little handheld device, and people are going to, we don't have the least idea about what kind of apps are going to develop out of this. But we're empowering developers to think of cool ideas. And the challenge for the utilities is, are they going to figure that out? Are they going to be ahead of that curve? Are they going to be part of that marketing process? Or is their market going to be taken out from underneath them, and they're going to be left with the three little old ladies in Decatur? We're still paying AOL for their email.
Two questions.
I really like this guy. He's been nodding his head the whole day.
Not a fan of coal, but given the capitalistic nature of our country and the value of private interest in the right to sell the commodity that I might be producing as a coal miner, is it really realistic to think that we will be able to prevent the exportation of a cheap energy source to overseas to give us a competitive advantage?
Well, I think you've positioned the argument in a very accurate way. I mean, we're really talking about running, Jay mentioned he's typically more of a free trader. I mean, you're running right at the free trade argument. You're running at the WTO. You're running at a long history, as you say, of what you can do with private property and so forth. I think it's more a philosophical question about what we want. I think that we could probably, clever minds in Washington and elsewhere can come up with approaches that would stand legal muster and accomplish the same result. But the real question is, what do we want as a country? Do we want to retain these resources, or do we want to export them? And I think that there are very good arguments on both sides of that. I mean, you're selling this to people who are paying you for it. It helps their balance of payments. It's competitiveness. So this could be, I could imagine an enormous debate at the national level about this. We haven't even begun to approach that debate. It was just a little bit of an appetizer for what's to come, I think.
Now, I don't want to get into the Keystone Pipeline, but the argument's somewhat similar. I think the concentration needs to keep being on the demand side and a little bit less on the supply side. You know, just as Reed said, it's the energy efficiency that's really driving this, you know, or can drive it, and it's the automobile efficiency standards that are really making a difference in the oil market. If we export coal, that is not necessarily increasing the demand for coal in an international environment. It's displacing coal mined in China, it's displacing coal mined in Australia or someplace else. The only way if you look at this as an economic model, the only way it increases the demand for coal is it lowers the price of coal. And then at the point you're lowering the price of coal, then indeed you would expand demand, just in simple economics. But I don't, to me, you know, we have to be talking with China about discouraging coal use and things like that. But I don't see this as, I haven't done the calculations, so I don't know for sure. But I suspect if you did them, that any increase in coal demand worldwide from American exports would be fairly marginal, and that the main impact would then be displacing coal from maybe Australia or other places where they'd be getting it.
Jay said he wouldn't talk about Keystone, so I'll jump in there. Keystone may be and probably is a bad idea for any number of reasons. But the reason the environmental community got onto it was because it was unlocking the tar sands of Alberta. And regardless of the specifics, the facts, it's the same problem, which is will those tar sands find a market or not? And I think that working with Canada to manage or restrict their exports or do something that attacks the problem directly, Keystone was just a proxy for that argument. And Keystone had a lot of bad ideas about it for its own right. And Rutherford would be happy to tell you some of the arguments if anybody wants to ask him afterwards. But I think that when Jim Hansen, the NASA scientist, climate scientist, said, if we do Keystone, it's game over, what he meant was we were accessing these unconventional oil reserves that are being produced in Canada. I am unhappy to report that what is really game over is shale gas and shale oil because it changes the fossil fuel reserve picture of this country and the planet in such a fundamental way that if we just use those resources, it's game over on climate, and we have to figure out ways to do it in ways that don't harm the climate the way conventional technology would.
I think we've reached the point where we have to get permission from Ben to proceed. Or have we run over our time? Or? You're in charge.
Okay, and I've seen a couple people sneak out the back, and if you have things to do, I understand that, but happy to stay with it as long as Jay's willing to run the video.
Yes. Of course, the theme is building consensus. I'm local, right? Took a class at Kennesaw State University last year and happened to attend a 2.5-hour lecture by a senior HR manager at, I guess I can name the power company here, which everybody knows. I didn't want to name names because he is currently employed and he's kind of a name, right? Nobody says, who is this guy? Clearly, their legacy costs of that company are such that they don't want to change. Again, I'll get into the politics of it. My question to him was about them being a lightly regulated monopoly. By the way, I'm a native of Texas, so I, have some insight on that. So here's my question to you. And by the way, I work for a company that you mentioned where we were pretty much a monopoly in the computer industry. I've been with them just 19 years as of last week. And so being in sales, I know what it's like to build consensus, right? And I've observed how my own company has gone from being a monopolistic power to how we have to really compete and be more consumer focused now than we were when I started 19 years ago. So here's my question to you. As a resident of Georgia, as an everyday person, without getting into politics, what needs to happen on a ground roots level for people to encourage more flexibility here? You understand what I'm saying? More flexibility.
Yeah.
In terms of things like we tried to get the power purchase agreement legislation through Georgia as recently as the past 30 days. It's just not going anywhere.
I think we just have to be realistic about what motivates people. And if I'm Georgia Power, I can understand all the social arguments that might be made for efficiency or renewable energy. But if that's going to lead me to deliver a poorer performance for my shareholders, I'm going to feel duty-bound to oppose that. And so it seems to me that you're right about the legacy costs. I don't have all the answers, but I could imagine a structure where the legacy costs get paid off not by a per kilowatt hour charge, but a per customer charge. Some equitable distribution, all residential customers pay $100 a year to be hooked up to the grid. Light industrials, 10 times, or whatever the scale would be. And then the power, the power costs would be more flexibly delivered. And one model that I've kicked around is, what if you had, in effect, a reward matrix, a performance matrix for the utility? And literally, consumers could deliver the scorecard. How are you doing on reducing my costs? How are you doing on answering the phone? How are you doing on keeping the system up without interruption? And if they got great scores, I'd like to see them get a better rate of return than they are today. And if they get lousy scores, they would do worse. This would start to motivate them to perform along those metrics. And that's, I think, what we want to accomplish. But the main point of it is, some utilities are going to be more willing than others to entertain the conversation. But if you start the conversation not by saying, you're bad people and I want to force you to do things that are not in your economic self-interest, but instead you say, you are an important part of this community, you deliver an essential service, you do it very well at very low cost, but we want to work with you to get additional results and compensate you for those results in ways that are better than your current economic model will produce, but will be more along the lines of the outcomes that we want. So you don't have to be the bad guy and fight the solar bill. You don't have to be the bad guy and fight the energy efficiency incentives. You could say, hell yes, let's do that, because that means I'm going to get more business. If we can get the economic incentives aligned for the utility, they should, and if they can see a different pathway forward for their business model, which is hard when you're successful and you've had a long history, but if they can see, hey, the world is changing, and we need to think about our economic model for the future, if they're willing to jump over that divide, I think that we can be on the same team instead of fighting each other all the time.
I agree with that, and let me just add something. In addition to having testified before the Congress a number of times, I've testified before a number of state legislative committees, and most of those in Florida. And I found that one of the quickest ways to lose the argument would be to start off by saying, this is the way they do it in California. If you start off that way, you might as well not talk anymore. However, we're in the situation now where, at least on the margins, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida have more progressive policies than we do. And so I think a lot of it is going to be researching how it's working in those states and then being able to make the case that it's been both better for the companies and for the customer. And I think that puts it in a sort of a real world framework that might conceivably be effective in the particular environment we have here.
I'll just add one thing, because we had an economist self-identify here. And you might say, how does that work, that you can have a win-win situation where it's better for the utility and better for the customer? I mean, doesn't that money have to come from somewhere? And the answer is, yeah, it does come from somewhere. It comes from the money we're wasting on unneeded power, and that money flows back to the high-cost producers of power. So the people who lose in this bargain are the high-cost producers of power. And if you're a company that owns those high-cost sources of power, you are going to be strongly opposed to this. But that's why the separation of generation and the rest of the system was important in a number of states, because you don't want them to be protecting their own assets at the expense of the consumer. But where those are separated, it ends up being, okay, Mr. Jones, who did the high costs, is selling at the high cost, you're losing some of your market share, and that was the gamble you made in the free market. But we're going to try to maximize the efficiency of the system and use power more on a more even basis and at lower cost. And if you take that rent out of the system economically, then everybody else shares that rent and benefits, and the utility can benefit, and the consumer can benefit.
So this is our last question today.
I got to give you guys a lot of credit for endurance. Thank you for hanging in there with us.
And thanks, Ben, for giving me the last question. I'm Anthony Coker with Soneva and the Georgia Solar Energy Association. I guess I can do a twofer since I've got the last question. And one of the questions keeps reminding me of a metaphor. When we start talking about fracking, it just keeps seeming like it's the injection of subcutaneous tumors into Mother Earth's crust. So it's bothersome in that regard. But we're going to get cheap natural gas out of it. And that leads to my first question about clean energy. I didn't see much about nuclear up there. And I'm sure the economics for expensive CapEx projects like nuclear change drastically when gas is at $2. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that, why you might not include it in your discussion and what happens to it. And then also, operationally, you mentioned PACE and those bond financing opportunities. And we keep talking about it, but it never seems to really get going. I was wondering if you could talk about how we might break that logjam on PACE as well.
Well, to take the second one first, I think that the mayor is actively looking at models in Sacramento and other places to see how they could be applied in this area. So we're hopeful that Atlanta will take some steps forward in that regard. With regard, that was such a good answer. Remind me of the previous one? Nuclear. Oh, yeah. Well, I think that you answered the question yourself. It's economics. And John Rowe, who ran Exelon, the big Illinois-based utility for 20 years, and who came out of an environmental background, he ran the utility on the basis essentially of a nuclear and some efficiency. And he said, we've been bad-mouthing renewables and gas our entire time here, and we're wrong and they're going to win. Because the economics of building a nuclear power plant are very, very hard to justify in any number of respects, anywhere in the world, in the U.S. in particular. Jim Rogers used to call gas the crack cocaine of utility executives because it's cheap, easy, you can put one up real quick and you get an immediate feedback. But he's building gas because you can't, there's some hard facts in the ground, and the hard facts are we've got a very, very cheap resource there that is going to be widely available for a long time. And it's a great, great fuel for utilities. And ultimately, in my judgment, will be, in effect, our fuel for transportation, not, in my view, directly, but through the electric system, that will end up with a more electricity-dependent transportation system with the electricity generated by this cheap gas cleaner than today's system. The whole system gets cleaner, cheaper, more efficient.
Thanks again to Reed for making the trip down here. I learned a lot and really appreciate Turner helping bringing him down here, and it was a great treat for me, and thank you for your remarks.
Okay, and ditto.
Thank you all for being here. Circle your calendars for May 10th for the next program. Thank you. Thanks for our excellent speaker.